At that depth, you don't hear the ocean. You hear your own hull, a steady, stressed whisper of metal under impossible load, like the sub is holding its breath so hard it could crack its own ribs. We were past 39,000 feet when the lights stuttered. Not a total failure. A flicker. A blink that felt personal. The pilot's hands tightened on the controls. The science lead stopped talking mid-sentence. Even the two observers in the rear, men who hadn't offered names in 3 days, leaned forward as if leaning could change physics. Then the sonar returned a shape so clean my brain rejected it on instinct. A ring, not a circle of rock, not a random arc. A ring with repeating internal struts, like the ribs of something built to hold pressure the way a spine holds posture. The pilot whispered, "That's not natural," before I could answer. A sound rose through the hydrophones, low, coherent, too steady for tectonics. It didn't feel like noise. It felt like a hand resting on the outside of our craft. And in the moment between that sound and my next breath, I understood the first real truth of the mission. Whatever was down there wasn't just alive. It was aware we had arrived. I'm retired now. Navy commander on paper, ordinary man at the grocery store. I mow my lawn, I wave at neighbors. I pretend my mind doesn't tilt toward the sea every time the house gets quiet. But there are nights when the Pacific comes back, black and endless, bringing with it that ring on sonar and the way the observers' faces changed when they saw it. Not wonder, not fear, recognition, because the dirty secret isn't that we found something. The secret is that someone had been waiting to confirm it. The call came through a channel I'd earned over 25 years in uniform. Not a normal summons, no formal orders, no travel itinerary in the system. A voice I recognized from an earlier life, someone I'd served under for exactly one operation and never spoken to again. "Commander," he said, "we need you for a maritime evaluation. Deep water, sensitive. You still able to keep your mouth shut?" I was sitting in my kitchen. The house was quiet. A normal evening with the kind of peace you don't appreciate until you realize peace is just the absence of certain phone calls. "What's the threat profile?" I asked. He paused. "Unknown," he said. "In the Navy, unknown means one of two things. They truly don't know, or they do, and you're not allowed to." 2 days later, I was on a support vessel in the Central Pacific. Far from shipping lanes, far from tourist routes, far from anything that would show up on a casual satellite image as interesting. Above deck, it looked like oceanographic work. Cranes, containers, antennas. Below deck, it felt like a forward operating base disguised in maritime paint. The crew wore civilian attire, but they moved like trained personnel. They avoided windows. They avoided naming things. They avoided each other. And there were 3 men, always together, who spoke in tight sentences and never introduced themselves. The first time I asked one of them who he worked for, he smiled without warmth. "Risk," he said. Then he walked away. The science team was real. That was the first thing that eased my skepticism. Dr. Marin Liao, the lead, had the posture of someone who'd spent years fighting for funding and field time. She spoke in numbers. Her hands were always stained with pen ink. She had that particular strain of calm scientists get when they're forced to sit near military secrecy. "We're mapping a trench segment," she said on the first briefing, voice steady, eyes tired, high resolution, multibeam, magnetics, EM. "Your job is to keep my people safe and make sure the hardware comes back in one piece." Simple, reasonable, almost believable. Then she pulled up the data. The trench profile was standard until the wall, where the sonar returns formed repeating geometry. A long, curved structure embedded in the rock, partially draped with silt. Not a wreck, too deep, not a vent chimney, wrong shape, not a landslide feature. too symmetrical. Even Dr. Liao, who had a scientist's instinct to avoid premature conclusions, leaned back and exhaled. "We've seen it on 3 passes," she said. "Different headings, different sea states, same return." I looked at the numbers. The depth at the target site was annotated as 40K FT equiv. "Equiv?" I asked. She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Our instruments disagree with each other," she said. "Pressure and depth readings don't reconcile cleanly. We're using equivalent because the water column behaves strangely down there. Like the trench isn't just deeper, like it's doing something." That was my first seed. Not aliens, not monsters. A trench that doesn't behave. We did not have a normal submersible. We had a deep-diving vehicle built like a vault, thick, spherical crew compartment, redundant seals, manipulator arms strong enough to move basalt, thrusters designed for precise station keeping. The hull rating wasn't printed on any public spec. The pilot, Ramos, was the kind of man who didn't waste words. Every movement was deliberate. Every check was repeated. In his world, superstition is just respect you show to physics. The 3rd seat belonged to me, mission safety. The 4th to Dr. Liao, science-led. Behind us, strapped into fold-down seats, 2 observers in plain gear. No insignia, no name tags. One carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. The other carried a small, hard case he never opened. Before we sealed the hatch, Clipboard Man looked at me and said, "If the asset presents, you don't improvise." Asset. That word traveled through me like a cold current. "What asset?" I asked. He smiled again, as if the question itself was naive. "You'll know," he said. Then he tapped his earpiece. "You'll be told." We launched before dawn. The Pacific was calm enough to look forgiving. That's what I tell people when they ask what it was like. Not the classified parts, just the surface. Calm. Because it feels insane to explain that a calm ocean can be a lid on something unimaginable. The descent starts with light. Then it becomes transition. Then it becomes absence. At a few thousand feet, the last thin blue dies. Everything past the viewport is black, not nighttime black, not the black of a room with lights off, a black that feels like there's no outside, only distance, only pressure, only the quiet idea that if you lose power down here, the ocean doesn't kill you, it erases you. Ramos called out depth and hull temperature like a priest reciting liturgy. 5,000 feet. 10,000. 15. The hull creaked occasionally, not alarming, not dramatic, just reminders. By 20,000, my ears felt strange, not from pressure in the cabin, but from the deep sense that the world above was becoming a myth. Dr. Liao watched the live feed from the sensors, lips moving silently, doing calculations without needing paper. The observers sat still. Too still, like men who weren't here to experience, only to collect. At 30,000 feet, the water outside became particulate, slow-falling marine snow that looked like ash drifting through a flood-lit ruin. At 35,000, the first unusual reading hit. EM spike. Clean. Coherent. Not random noise. Dr. Liao straightened. "That's not baseline," she murmured. Ramos didn't look away from the controls. "We're still a mile out," he said. Clipboard Man leaned forward. "Repeat the reading," he ordered. Dr. Liao shot him a look. "It's repeating itself," she said. "I don't need to request it. It's already doing it." It, already. Doing. It. Second seed planted. Something down there was broadcasting, not accidentally. The seafloor emerged in our lights like a pale stage. Fine sediment, soft ripples, occasional life moving like living glass. We traveled along the trench wall, our lights sweeping over rock scarps and silt drifts. Then the sonar changed. The return sharpened. The hollow center appeared. And there it was. The ring, embedded in the wall like a fossil of engineering. It wasn't smooth like manufactured steel. It was layered, like mineral growth had been guided into geometry. A lattice of repeating ribs and braces that made my mind think of bone and bridgework at the same time. Dr. Liao exhaled once, slowly. "We're not the first to see this," she whispered. I looked at her. "What makes you say that?" She didn't answer with conspiracy. She answered with a scientist's quiet dread. "Because it's not hidden," she said. "It's placed." Placed, the most dangerous word in exploration. Ramos held us at station. The thrusters stirred silt. The ring didn't move. Then the hydrophones picked up the tone. Low at first, like distant machinery, then closer, modulated, not random. It rose and fell in patterns that made the hair on my arms stand. Clipboard man's voice tightened. "Confirm contact," he said. No one answered him, because we were all listening. And deep in the pressure, the ocean seemed to answer back. Dr. Liao extended the manipulator arm. Her fingers hovered over a control as if she were touching something sacred. I watched her, and I understood she wasn't just trying to sample rock. She was trying to do the first human gesture that mattered down here, a touch, a signal. We moved the claw closer. The ring responded. Not by retreating, not by attacking, by changing. A shimmer traveled along the lattice like a wave moving through a spiderweb. A section relaxed open, not like a door swinging, like layers unsealing. Inside was darkness deeper than darkness, a void that swallowed our light. Something drifted out. Two forms, pale and large, roughly the size of seals, but wrong in shape, vertical, tapering, with edges that seemed to flex like soft armor. Bands of bioluminescence pulsed across them. The pulses changed in response to our lights, then in response to the hydrophone tone. They were synchronizing. Ramos whispered, "That's not fauna." Dr. Liao didn't correct him. She couldn't. The forms hovered without visible propulsion. They held position like the water itself had decided to support them. Then they drifted closer to our viewport. Not fast. Controlled. Deliberate. A negotiation of distance. Clipboard man spoke, low and urgent. "Do not retreat," he said. I turned slightly, enough for him to see my eyes. "You don't give orders in my cabin," I said. His jaw tightened. "I'm not ordering," he said. "I'm reminding you of protocol." Protocol, another word that sounds neutral until you realize it's a leash. The forms paused inches beyond our lights. One rotated. The pulsing bands aligned into a pattern that felt like a gesture. I can change the signal. I can decide what you receive. My throat went tight. Not with fear, with an old instinct from naval combat. When something approaches your ship and holds the edge of your weapons range, it's not stumbling into you. It's choosing a boundary. It's showing you control. Behind the two forms, inside the ring's darkness, faint points of light glowed. More. Not hundreds. Not an army. A handful. Enough to make the abyss feel inhabited. Enough to make me understand this wasn't a lone creature. It was a site, a place. Third seed planted. A structure, a community, a boundary. Then the coded burst hit our comm channel. Abort criteria met. Pull back, ascend. The words were tight, clipped, not negotiable. Ramos looked at me. "Commander?" he asked. Clipboard man snapped. "Negative. Continue. We need a sample." The other observer finally opened his hard case. Inside was a device shaped like a short baton with sensor heads and a small injector. My stomach dropped. A sampling tool. Or something worse. Dr. Liao's voice was small. "Please don't," she whispered. "Not to me, to them, to the program, to the invisible chain above our heads. I made the call." "We're leaving," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I used the tone you use when the sea is about to take someone, and you don't have time for debate. Ramos eased us back. Thrusters stirred silt. The two forms followed for a moment, then stopped at the edge of our light. They did not pursue. They did not panic. They held their boundary. And that's when the strangest part happened. As we withdrew, the hydrophones caught a new modulation. Slower. Lower. It didn't feel like warning. It felt like marking, like placing a flag in sound. Not for us, for something else. Ramos swallowed. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Dr. Liao nodded, face pale. "They're not talking to us," she whispered. I stared at the waveform. The pattern was too coherent, too deliberate, a signal with an audience, and suddenly the ring didn't feel like a nest. It felt like a relay. We ascended under orders. On the way up, our EM sensors spiked again, then stabilized into a steady tone, like something was tracking us without moving, like the trench itself had eyes. Back on deck, the debrief wasn't a debrief. It was confiscation. Our camera drives were removed. Our personal logs were collected. Our voices were separated into different rooms. A man with a calm face asked questions like a physician. "Did you feel compelled?" "Compelled to do what?" I asked. "To comply," he said. The word landed hard. Compliance. Not curiosity, not awe. Compliance. They gave us a clean explanation. Unknown bioluminescent fauna, rare deep-sea behavior, inconclusive data. They spoke it like a script. Dr. Liao stared at the table as if the wood grain might save her. Ramos kept his jaw tight. I watched the observers. They didn't look satisfied. They looked restrained, like men whose hands had been slapped away from a weapon they believed they deserved. That night, I stood alone at the stern of the ship. The Pacific behind us looked endless and harmless. Stars overhead, a peaceful horizon. And yet I could feel it. Not sonar, not pressure, a sense of being noticed. Like the ocean had learned my name. I told myself it was nerves, sleep deprivation, adrenaline. But I'd known fear in combat. And this wasn't fear. This was displacement. The feeling that your species has been the loudest voice in a room until you realize the room was never yours. On day 4, they moved the ship. Not a normal relocation. A hard turn at speed. A new heading without explanation. The science team was told we were avoiding a weather system. But the sky was clean. The water calm. No storm on radar. Dr. Liao found me in the corridor outside the mess. Her voice was low. "They're lying," she said. I didn't ask who. We both knew. "They were never going to let us bring evidence back," she continued. "The mission wasn't mapping. It was confirmation." I held her gaze. "Confirmation for what?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Because they've been losing contact," she whispered. I felt my stomach tighten. "Losing contact with what?" Her eyes darted toward a camera in the ceiling. Then back to me. "I don't know what to call it," she said, "but I've seen older data sets, old water column anomalies, old EM patterns. Someone's been tracking this trench for a long time. And lately," she swallowed, "the patterns have been changing. Like, whatever is down there isn't following its old routine anymore. Changing. The most dangerous word in intelligence, because change means movement, and movement means intention. That afternoon, they told us we were diving again. Not to the ring. To a different coordinate along the trench wall. Secondary feature, the calm man said. He didn't say ring. He didn't say forms. He didn't say aliens, he said feature, as if language could keep reality manageable. When we sealed into the DSV the second time, the cabin felt smaller. Not physically, emotionally. Dr. Liao's hands shook once before she steadied them. Ramos ran checks twice. The observers were different. Only one was the clipboard man. The other was new. Older, scarred hands, eyes like steel. He didn't sit. He braced behind us like a guard. As we descended again, the ocean felt less like an environment and more like a territory. The hydrophones picked up the low tone sooner, at shallower depth, as if the trench were reaching upward. Dr. Liao stared at the waveform. "It's anticipating," she whispered. Clipboard man didn't pretend anymore. "Good," he said. "Then it's ready." Ready. Like this was a negotiation, like we were part of an exchange that began before any of us were born. At 38,000 feet equivalent, our forward lights cut across a new feature, not the ring. A vertical fissure in the trench wall, long, smooth-edged, almost too straight. Ramos slowed. "Natural?" he asked. Dr. Liao shook her head. "Not like that," she murmured. We drifted closer. The fissure's interior wasn't rock. It reflected light like a wet surface, a membrane. As we approached, it rippled, subtle, controlled. Then it opened, not peeling, not tearing, parting, like a curtain made of water deciding to let us see behind it. Inside was a cavity. Impossible. At that pressure, voids don't remain voids. They collapse. They fill. They become crushed memory, but our instruments showed a stable pocket, dense, warm, electromagnetically active. Dr. Liao's breathing hitched. "What is that?" she whispered. Clipboard man's voice went tight with something I hated. "That," he said, "is the station." Station. Not nest, not cave, station, meaning someone built it, meaning someone uses it, meaning someone expects it. Ramos looked at me. "Commander," he said quietly, "this isn't what we signed for." I didn't answer, because he was right, and because the ocean doesn't care what you signed for. The older observer behind us leaned forward. In a calm, practiced voice, he said, "Proceed. Slow." It wasn't a request. It was the tone of a man who has already decided what your life is worth. We crossed the membrane, and the world changed. Inside the membrane, the water didn't feel like water. It felt arranged. The lights from our sub didn't scatter the way they should. Instead of a messy cone of reflections, the beams traveled clean and narrow, as if the medium had been combed into order. Particles hung in place longer than they should, drifting with a laziness that didn't match the thrusters. Ramos's voice came low. "Are we still moving?" We were. Our instruments said we were. But my eyes refused to agree. It looked like we'd entered a pocket where the rules of drift and turbulence had been edited. Dr. Liao leaned closer to her screen. Pressure readings fluctuated in a pattern, not a wave. Temperature held steady in a way that mocked the trench's cold. Our depth gauge did something I'd never seen. It stabilized, not at a clean number, at a range. As if depth had stopped being a single measurement and become an argument between sensors. Behind us, the older observer, steel eyes, scarred hands, said, "Maintain heading. Proceed another 50 meters." Ramos glanced at me again, asking with his eyes what his mouth didn't dare. "This is wrong." I answered him with the smallest nod. "Keep steady. Stay alive." We moved forward. The cavity opened wider than the trench should allow, an internal space that felt larger than its entrance, not like a cave, like a room. Light appeared. Not our light. A dim lattice of points suspended in the dark, arranged in arcs that curved beyond our beams. They weren't attached to rock. They floated like stars in a controlled sky. As our sub approached, those points began to pulse, one after the other, not random, sequenced. A wave of illumination rolling through the cavity with the timing of speech. Dr. Liao's lips parted. "It's a display," she whispered. The pulse pattern changed, faster, then slower, as if matching our engines, like the station was syncing with us. Then the hydrophones registered a new signal. The tone from outside was still there, but now it layered with something more complex. Overlapping harmonics, multiple sources, a kind of underwater chord. I felt it in my teeth, in my sternum. The sound wasn't loud. It was intimate, the way a bass note can move through bone. Clipboard man behind us, still there, still pretending he wasn't scared, said, "Record everything, all channels." Dr. Liao didn't answer. She'd stopped being a scientist for a moment. She'd become a witness. We passed a cluster of the floating lights, and the beam finally reached something solid, a structure. Not the ring, not a membrane, a surface that looked like layered glass and mineral at once, curved and segmented, as if grown into panels that could shift. It wasn't reflective like metal. It absorbed our light, then returned a faint, altered glow. It reminded me of deep-sea organisms that create their own darkness by swallowing illumination. Except this was deliberate, engineered, or cultivated. Ramos muttered, "That's a wall." The wall curved away, implying a chamber, a station. And as my mind tried to imagine it in full, the hydrophones shifted again. The chord changed, and something moved. A form appeared at the edge of our beam, not one of the two that had greeted us outside. This one was larger, closer to human height if you stood it upright, but it didn't stand. It hovered, rotating slowly, like a leaf turning in a gentle current. Its silhouette was smoother than the others, more refined. And along its body, the bioluminescent bands weren't scattered. They were organized, lines and arcs pulsing in disciplined sequence, as if rank existed down here. The older observer exhaled once, not awe, relief. He said a single word, soft like a confession. "Present." He hadn't been calling this a station because he liked the term. He'd been calling it that because he knew exactly what he'd come to find. The being drifted closer. Our sub's internal lights flickered. Not a power failure. A momentary dimming, like a hand passed over a bulb. Then everything stabilized, and the being held at the edge of our beam. It didn't rush, it didn't flee, it simply waited, like it expected us to decide what we were, explorers or thieves. Dr. Liao spoke first. Her voice came out careful, almost reverent. "Hello," she said, as if sound could travel through glass, through pressure, through species. The being's bands pulsed in response. Then the hydrophones caught a shift, modulation tight enough to resemble syllables. Ramos whispered, "It answered." I wanted to say, "It can't," but the word "can't" is what you say right before reality humiliates you. Instead, I watched the pulse sequence. 3 quick bursts, a pause, a long tone, a second pause, then a repetition slightly altered. Not random. A structure, a greeting, or an assessment. The science part of my brain tried to build hypotheses. The operator part of my brain did something simpler. It logged one fact. We weren't alone in the trench, and whatever this was, it could communicate. Clipboard man leaned forward. "Move the sub 5 meters closer," he ordered. Ramos didn't move. He looked at me. The older observer's hand slid toward his belt as if he expected pushback. I kept my voice steady. "We are not pushing into its space," I said. Clipboard man's jaw tightened. "We need proximity for sampling," he said. Dr. Liao's head snapped around. Sampling? She repeated. I didn't like the word either, not because it's unethical in all cases. Science does sample, but because of who was saying it, and how. Sampling, in their mouths, sounded like acquisition, a thing taken, a thing claimed. The being rotated slightly. The pulse pattern changed, slower now. And for the first time, something like a pressure wave brushed the hull. Not impact, not force, a touch, a sensation like a fingertip testing the surface of a drum. The cabin fell quiet. Even Clipboard Man stopped breathing for a second. Then the sub's internal clock blinked. A single digit changed. Then changed back, like time had hiccuped. Ramos swallowed. "Commander," he said, "our inertial reference is drifting." The older observer spoke without emotion. "They're scanning." He said it the way a man says the sky is blue, like he'd been here before. My mind flashed to Dr. Liao's corridor confession. They've been losing contact. So this wasn't first contact. This was renewed contact, or attempted control. The being held position. The lights in the cavity pulsed again. And then the third seed, boundary, grew teeth, because the pulses resolved into a shape, not English, not any language, a shape my mind understood anyway, a line, a barrier, a limit. It wasn't saying hello, it was saying stop. Dr. Liao's voice shook. "It doesn't want us closer," she whispered. Clipboard Man hissed. "It doesn't get to decide." That sentence told me everything. Humans at the edge of discovery can react in two ways: reverence or entitlement. And entitlement is how you start wars you don't survive. The older observer's hard case device appeared in his hand. He didn't raise it yet. He simply held it, angled toward the viewport like a priest preparing a sacrament. Except I could see the injector tip. "This is a tag," he said, almost kindly, as if explaining to a child. "Non-lethal. We mark it. We track it. We learn its roots." Dr. Liao stared at him. "You want to tag a sentient organism at the bottom of the ocean?" she said. "It's not an organism," Clipboard Man snapped. "What is it then?" she asked. He didn't answer, because the truth was he didn't care. It was a target, a resource, a problem to solve. The being's bands flickered, the hydrophone cord tightened, and the floating lights in the cavity, those star points, shifted subtly, forming a curve that resembled an eye, not a literal eye, a pattern, a symbol of attention. The entire station seemed to lean toward us. Ramos whispered, "We should back out." I agreed. But we weren't alone in the decision anymore. And decisions under secrecy don't belong to the people inside the hull. They belong to the people who never risk their own skin. Clipboard Man said, "Proceed, 5 meters." The older observer lifted the tag device. Dr. Liao looked at me. Her eyes were pleading. Not because she thought I was a hero, because she knew the only thing standing between the unknown and human impulse was the person in the room who still believed rules mattered. I didn't argue. I didn't lecture. I simply reached over and placed my hand on Ramos's control panel. "No," I said. 2 letters, a boundary of my own. The older observer's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand the stakes," he said. "I understand the stakes perfectly," I replied. Because the stakes weren't just our lives. The stakes were what kind of species we were going to be in the presence of something that could draw a line. The older observer's finger tightened on the device. And in that moment, the being moved. Not forward, not back, up. It rose above our beam, and the bioluminescent bands on its body flared bright enough to light the cavity like moonlight. The hydrophones screamed. Not loud, compressed. A burst of coherent sound that hit the hull like a command. Every screen in the sub flickered, every sensor spiked. Then, without warning, the thrusters cut. Not a failure, a shutdown. as if something outside had reached in and turned off our ability to move. Ramos's hands flew over switches. "No response," he said, voice rising. "Thrusters unresponsive." Clipboard man cursed. The older observer raised the tag device again. Instinct, reflex. And then he froze. Literally. His arm held in mid-motion like an invisible hand had clamped it. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. No sound. The tag device hung in his grip, trembling. Dr. Liao whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't say the word. I didn't want to give it power, but my mind was doing its own calculations. If they can shut down our thrusters, if they can lock a human arm in place, they can end us. And they aren't. The being drifted closer, not to threaten, to clarify. Its bands pulsed slowly. The station lights shifted into a new sequence. And then, for the first time, I felt it. Not in my ears, in my thoughts, not a voice, a transfer, an image, a sensation. A compressed block of understanding placed in my mind like a hand setting down a stone. Boundary. Respect. Leave. I gasped, not because it hurt, because it was intimate. Because something had reached into the private interior of my being and written a sentence in a language deeper than words. Dr. Liao made a small sound, half sob, half laugh. "You feel it too," she whispered. Ramos stared at us. "What?" he asked. Then his face changed. He felt it, all at once, like a door opened in his mind without permission. The older observer still couldn't move. His arm trembled. His eyes burned with fury and fear. Clipboard man leaned forward, breathing hard. "It's manipulating you," he hissed. I turned my head slightly. "Or it's communicating," I said. "That's a distinction without difference," he snapped. No, it was the only distinction that mattered. Manipulation is dominance. Communication is relationship. And the being wasn't dominating. It was setting terms. The images continued. Not cinematic scenes, not a movie. Fragments. A map-like awareness of currents. A sense of distance that wasn't measured in miles but in conditions. A memory of the ring opening. A memory of humans coming before. Not hundreds, not armies. Small intrusions, probes, darts, noise. And then something else. A sharp, jagged presence in the trench. Not these beings. Something that pushed, something that tore. A wound in the deep. The being showed me that wound like you show someone the edge of a broken glass. Danger. Contained. Then the message tightened. Your kind's tag becomes a hook. Hooks pull, pulling breaks, breaking wakes. My mouth went dry. "Contained?" I whispered without realizing I'd spoken. The being's bands pulsed once. "Yes." Dr. Liao swallowed. "What is it containing?" she asked. The next image was worse, a pulse of red light in the trench, a field tearing, a cascade, like dominoes falling, but the dominoes were physical laws, the impression of a surface city, lights on the edge of water, flickering, not destroyed, threatened. The being wasn't showing us conquest, it was showing us consequence. Clipboard man's face tightened. He wasn't receiving it the way we were, or maybe he was, and he hated what it implied. Because if something down here could contain a danger, then the danger wasn't aliens. The danger was what humans might unleash trying to own them. The older observer suddenly regained movement. He inhaled sharply like a man coming up from a drowning. The tag device dropped from his hand, clattering to the deck. He stared at the being with a kind of shaken respect. For a second, I saw the soldier in him, the part that recognizes superior force and chooses not to die foolishly. Then Clipboard man ruined it. He lunged forward, grabbing the tag device. "Enough!" he spat. He raised it toward the viewport. Dr. Liao screamed, "Stop!" And I moved. I didn't punch him. I didn't tackle. Those are human solutions. I did something colder. I grabbed his wrist and drove it down, pinning the injector toward the floor. His eyes widened. "You're obstructing an operation," he hissed. "I'm preventing an incident," I said. Ramos shouted, "Commander, thrusters just came back." The being drifted backward a fraction. The station lights softened, as if it had been waiting to see whether we could control ourselves. A test, not of strength, of restraint. I leaned close to Clipboard Man. "If you fire that," I said quietly, "you may not get a second chance to regret it." His jaw worked. Then, reluctantly, he lowered the device. The older observer exhaled. He looked at me like he hated me, and like he was grateful. The being pulsed again. A final impression entered my mind. Not a warning, a condition. Leave. Do not return with hooks. Return with empty hands, or not at all. Then the membrane behind us rippled. A corridor opening, an exit. The thrusters responded. Ramos didn't wait for anyone's permission. He eased us backward, slow and respectful. We retreated the way you back away from a sleeping animal you suddenly realize can wake you with a thought. As we crossed the membrane out, the medium shifted back into ordinary water. The beams scattered again. Particles drifted like they should. The trench wall returned. The pressure returned. And the two forms outside the station waited at the ring like guards at a gate. They didn't follow. They didn't wave. They simply held. We turned our lights once more toward the station. The membrane sealed, not closing like a door, becoming invisible, as if it had never been there. The trench wall looked like rock again, except our instruments still carried the aftertaste of something coherent, a pattern, a signature. On ascent, the ocean felt different, not because the water had changed, because we had. Ramos kept glancing at the instrument panel like it might lie. Dr. Liao stared into the dark, lips pressed tight, eyes shining with a grief I recognized. Not grief for what she'd lost, grief for what she'd learned about her own species. The observers were silent. The older one sat with his hands clasped, knuckles white. Clipboard Man stared at the tag device in his lap as if it had betrayed him. No one spoke for a long stretch. Then Dr. Liao said, "They weren't afraid of us." Ramos answered without turning. "No," he said. "They were disappointed." The word landed heavy, because disappointment implies expectation, and expectation implies history. At about 20,000 feet, our EM sensors spiked again, not as sharply. A gentle rise, a steady tone, like someone above was checking whether we were still breathing. Ramos stiffened. "Commander," he said, "we're being tracked." I watched the graph. The signal held for 3 minutes, then faded. Not like interference drifting away, like something choosing to stop. When we finally surfaced, the sun was higher than it should have been. I checked my watch. We'd been down for less time than our ascent profile allowed. A compressed mission, a missing chunk of time. Ramos looked at me. "You seeing this?" he asked. Dr. Liao whispered. "Time dilation." Clipboard Man snapped. "Do not say that out loud." As if naming it would make it real, as if it wasn't already real in our blood. They hauled us onto deck with the efficiency of people who'd done it before. The hatch opened. Warm air hit my face. Ordinary ocean smell. Blue sky. And for a moment, I felt insane, because a part of me wanted to believe the station was a fever dream. Then I saw Dr. Liao's expression, and Ramos's, and the older observer's hands shaking. And I knew. We had been somewhere the ocean doesn't permit. The debrief wasn't a debrief. It was a controlled burn. They separated us. They took the drives. They took the hydrophone recordings. They took the sensor logs. They took our words before we could share them with each other. A calm man in a plain shirt sat across from me. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He opened with an odd question. Did it attempt to establish rapport? He asked. Not. What did you see? Not. Are you okay? Rapport. I stared at him. You knew, I said. He smiled faintly. We suspected, he replied. I felt the heat rise. You sent us down there without telling us we were walking into contact, I said. He didn't deny it. Commander, he said, you were selected because you can follow instruction under stress. There it was, not a mission, a test, a human temperament study conducted at the edge of the planet. I leaned forward. What is it? I asked. He paused as if choosing between truths. Then he said, non-human intelligence. He didn't say alien. He didn't say extraterrestrial. He didn't say species. He said intelligence. That word is clean and dangerous because intelligence can be used. Have you been here before? I asked. His eyes flicked down, then back. We've observed, he said. Not. We've met. Observed. Like they'd been watching through instruments, waiting to turn observation into control. Why now? I asked. The calm man's expression hardened by a millimeter. Because contact patterns changed, he said. Dr. Liao's whisper echoed in my head. They've been losing contact. The calm man continued. Because the trench signature started appearing in new regions. Because signals started surfacing in places they shouldn't. And because we received a response to a ping that was not generated by our equipment. A response. Someone down there had answered, or someone down there had initiated. I asked the question I'd been avoiding. Are they hostile? He didn't answer with certainty. He answered with bureaucracy. Intent is undetermined, he said. Then he added, but capability is high. That was their focus, not the nuance, not the boundary. Capability. And you wanted to tag it, I said. He didn't blink. We need persistent tracking, he said. So you can do what? I asked. He held my gaze. So we can avoid strategic surprise. Strategic surprise? That phrase is a doorway. It's how you justify building weapons in the name of defense. It's how you turn the unknown into an enemy before it ever becomes a neighbor. He slid a document across the table. A non-disclosure agreement with language that made my skin crawl. It didn't just forbid talking. It claimed ownership of information, of recordings, of memory. Sign, he said. I read it. Then I looked up. If I sign, you'll go back, I said. He didn't answer. Silence is an answer when you're dealing with programs that live in darkness. I signed. Not because I was loyal, because I understood something else. If I refused, they'd cut me out and proceed anyway. If I signed, I stayed close enough to learn what they planned. Over the next weeks, I watched the ship become a machine. New equipment arrived in sealed crates. New observers rotated in. The science team was reduced to a cover story. Dr. Liao became a liability. They treated her like a witness they couldn't fully silence, and that made them nervous. Ramos was kept busy, exhausted, isolated. And me? They used me. They asked me to advise on contingency, on response, on what to do if the asset attempted to breach. They spoke in the language of threat, never in the language of relationship. One night, I found Dr. Liao on deck staring at the sea. The wind tore at her hair. She didn't look at me when she spoke. They're going to provoke them, she said. I didn't deny it. Why would they do that? She asked. Because humans don't trust what they can't control. Because in our world, restraint looks like weakness. Because the people running this didn't rise through the system by respecting boundaries. They rose by crossing them. But I didn't say any of that. I said something smaller. Because they don't believe the line is real, I told her. She nodded. Until the line cuts them, she whispered. The next dive was scheduled without her. They told her her participation was no longer required. She argued. They threatened. She backed down. Not out of fear. Out of the sick realization that she was standing in front of a machine that didn't care about truth. It cared about advantage. I went down on that dive, not because I wanted to, because I needed to be there when they tried to pull the hook. The descent felt faster, or maybe my mind was compressing time, bracing for impact. Ramos kept his face tight. The new operator observer carried a case larger than the tag device. When I asked what it was, he said, "Signal enhancer." He said it like it was harmless. Like it wasn't a provocation. As we approached the trench, the low tone rose earlier. The station knew. The ring appeared. The two forms emerged. And this time, the pulse pattern was different, not curious, guarded, a tightened boundary. The operator observer set his device near the viewport. It had coils, an emitter, a focused array. He powered it up. The cabin lights dimmed. The hydrophones screamed, not with noise, with interference. The being's pulses stuttered. The two forms shifted backward like startled animals. Dr. Liao's absence felt like a wound. She would have called this what it was. Aggression disguised as experiment. "Shut it down," I said. The operator observer ignored me. Clipboard man wasn't there this time. Different face, same appetite. "We need a stronger response," he said. Ramos's voice shook. "Commander, this is wrong," he said. I said, "Ramos, hold position. Do not advance." The emitter's tone intensified, and from the ring, something new appeared. Not a being. A field. A distortion in the water itself. A ripple that made our lights bend. The medium thickened again. The membrane began to open. Not because we were invited, because we were forcing it. My stomach dropped. This was the hook. The pull. The breaking. The waking. The station lights flared. Not a greeting. A warning. The hydrophone cord tightened into something like a siren. And then the sharp presence I'd seen in the earlier impression brushed the edge of my mind. Jagged. Hungry. Not language. Impulse. A pressure that wanted to move upward. To spill. To climb. The beings at the ring held it back. Bands pulsing fast. Synchronized. Like a team bracing against a surge. They weren't just guarding themselves. They were guarding us. I didn't think. I acted. I reached past the observer and slammed the emitter's power switch down. The device went silent. The cabin light steadied. The ring's beings surged forward. A wave of coherent sound hit the hull, and every sensor in the sub reset as if forcibly rebooted. The sharp presence recoiled. Not gone. Pulled back. Contained. The operator observer lunged at me. "You just compromised the mission," he snarled. I grabbed his collar and shoved him back into his seat. "This isn't your mission," I said, voice low. "This is their boundary, and you are about to get us killed." He spat a curse. Ramos stared at me, a mix of gratitude and terror, because he knew what I'd done. I'd picked a side. Not for politics, for survival. The ring's beings pulsed in a pattern that felt like anger. Then, something colder, a message, no hooks, no forcing, last. The word landed in my mind like a stone. Not last chance for them, last chance for us. The membrane sealed, hard. The station vanished. The ring's opening closed. The two forms drifted closer, closer than before, and for a moment I thought we'd crossed the line. Then their bands softened. A final impression. You do not own the deep. The deep tolerates you. Then they disappeared. Not swimming away. Just gone. As if the ocean itself had decided to hide them. We ascended in silence. Ramos didn't speak. The observer stared at his dead device like it had betrayed him. I stared at the dark, feeling the weight of the line. Because I knew what would happen topside. They would call me disloyal. They would call me compromised. They would call me a risk. On deck, the confrontation came fast. I was met by armed personnel I hadn't seen on the ship before. They escorted me, not guided, escorted, to a compartment with bright lights and no windows. The calm man sat there again. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Commander," he said, "you interfered." "You provoked them," I replied. He folded his hands. "We tested signal amplification," he said. "You tested whether you could pull a leash," I said. His eyes narrowed. "They are a strategic unknown," he said. "Our responsibility is to reduce uncertainty." "And my responsibility," I said, "was to keep the crew alive and to prevent you from triggering something you don't understand." He watched me for a long moment. Then he said, "Are you experiencing unusual dreams?" There it was again. Not concern. Surveillance. They weren't just tracking the beings, they were tracking the effects of contact on humans, like we were the secondary asset. I didn't answer. Not because I was brave, because I understood the trap. If I admitted the impressions, they would classify me as compromised. If I denied them, they would assume I was hiding. Either way, they'd isolate me. He slid another document across, not an NDA, a reassignment, a quiet removal. "Effective immediately," he said. I read it. "You're ending my role," I said. "We're protecting the program," he replied. I looked up. "And who protects the ocean?" I asked. He didn't smile. "The ocean doesn't require protection," he said. That sentence chilled me more than the trench ever had, because it revealed his worldview. The ocean was just a space, a theater, a place to extend control. They flew me home under escort. No formal court, no public accusation. Just the quiet pressure of a system that can ruin you without leaving fingerprints. My clearance was reduced, my career stalled. My evaluations became strange. Phrases like inconsistent judgment, emotional interference, risk of narrative drift. Narrative drift. As if the real danger wasn't what we found. It was what it would mean if people believed boundaries could be enforced by something non-human. Dr. Liao contacted me once. A burner email. One sentence. They scrubbed the data. Ramos never contacted me. Maybe he was too scared. Maybe he was under tighter control. Maybe he decided silence was the only way to keep his family safe. I don't blame him. The machine is good at teaching you that truth is expensive. I retired early. Not because I wanted peace, because I couldn't stand living inside a lie I'd helped build, and because the impressions didn't leave. The line, the boundary, the sharp presence contained, the warning about hooks. Years passed. The world moved on. New headlines, new distractions. But every so often, I'd see a news story about unidentified undersea anomalies, or a strange burst of sensor noise on a leaked clip, or a phrase from a defense hearing that sounded like a euphemism. Non-human intelligence, transmedium objects, anomalous signatures. And I'd feel my stomach tighten, because I knew what that language was. It wasn't disclosure. It was positioning. The slow preparation of a public mind to accept a future conflict framed as defense. Here is what I can tell you without pretending I'm offering proof. At 40,000 feet equivalent, we entered a pocket in the trench where the ocean behaved like a controlled medium. We encountered a structure that functioned as a station, stable void, coherent EM activity, internal lighting patterns. We encountered beings that were not mindless animals, not random deep-sea fauna. They responded to our presence with boundaries. They communicated terms. They restrained us without killing us. And most important, they were containing something. That last part is what changes the entire story. because it means the Pacific Trench isn't just a hiding place. It's a lock, a dam, a boundary line drawn by minds that understand the deep better than we ever will. And if that lock breaks, it won't matter whether you call what spills out alien or anomaly or non-human intelligence. It will behave like pressure behaves. It will move toward release. So why am I speaking now? Because retirement gives you a strange kind of courage. Because the machine that threatened my career can't threaten my pension the same way. Because I've watched how humans react to the unknown. We don't ask, "What are you?" We ask, "What can you do for us?" We don't approach like neighbors. We approach like owners. And I keep thinking about that first boundary, stop, not as hostility, as instruction. A lesson as old as the ocean itself. There are places you can enter only if you accept you don't get to rewrite the rules. The last image that stays with me isn't the ring or the station. It's the moment we withdrew and the beings held their line, didn't chase, didn't punish, didn't gloat. They simply maintained restraint. And in that restraint, there was something almost human. Not in biology, in ethic. The capacity to understand that power doesn't have to be used, that the strongest thing you can do sometimes is not to take. People ask, if something like that exists in our ocean, why don't we see it every day? Because the deep is not our environment, it's our border. We visit it like tourists with weapons, and whatever lives there has had more time than we can imagine to learn how to hide. Not because it's weak, because it's wise. There's another question people ask, usually with a nervous laugh. If they're down there, have they always been? I don't know, but I know this. The station felt old, not rusted, not decayed. Old the way a reef is old. Old the way a language is old. Old in the way something becomes part of its environment instead of sitting on top of it. And that suggests a history longer than our brief modern fascination. The final question is the one I can't stop asking myself. What happens when humans decide the line is unacceptable? Because that is our pattern. We treat boundaries as insults. We treat restraint as an obstacle. We treat the unknown as an open market. If you want a neat ending, I can't give you one. This story doesn't end. It waits. It waits the way a trench waits. It waits the way pressure waits. And somewhere in the black water where depth becomes argument and light becomes permission, something holds a lock in place. Not for their benefit, for ours. So the next time you hear a phrase like anomalous undersea signature and your mind jumps to invasion, remember what I felt in that cavity. They didn't rush us. They didn't take us. They didn't hunt us. They drew a line, and they expected us to be worthy of it. Maybe that's the real test. Not whether aliens exist, but whether we can look at something powerful, unfamiliar, and profoundly not ours, and choose restraint. Because if the deep has taught anything to sailors, it's this. The ocean will let you believe you're in control, right up until the second it proves you never were. And if there really is a station 40,000 feet below the Pacific, and if it's holding back something we were never meant to wake, then the most dangerous creature in that trench might not be the one with bioluminescent bands. It might be the one with a clipboard and a hook.